Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakups podcast with your host, AJ Mahari. This podcast will give you an in-depth understanding of borderline personality disorder, whether you have it or a loved one, partner, ex, friend, adult child, or sibling of someone with borderline personality disorder. AJ Mahari is a counselor and trauma recovery coach who has 30 years experience working with those surviving borderline personality relationship breakups in all relationship types, healing from codependency, inner child healing, family of origin healing, and self-differentiation, narcissistic abuse recovery, and much more. Keeping it real to help you heal. Abuse is not love. You can find this podcast at ajmahari.ca, where you can also purchase and book sessions with AJ Mahari. Please also subscribe to AJ Mahari's YouTube channel at youtube.com/AJ Mahari.
So many people are still so invested in a person with BPD or suspected BPD who just hasn't had treatment. Maybe they've had 3 weeks, maybe a month. Maybe they're trying everything but what they really need to look into. Maybe they know they have BPD, maybe they don't. So on my YouTube channel, on the last live stream I did, which will probably be coming up here in audio soon, BPDX Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Q&A, there was a comment left on that where someone said, where I was talking in the live stream about therapy for people with BPD, why so many won't go. I think I was asked a question about why so many people with BPD don't go to therapy. And a person left a comment with a time reference and said to add on to what I had said at that point of a live stream video, what makes it so difficult for those who have BPD to remain in therapy? That was the question. And they said in their experience with their person with BPD, their BPDX, that they were living relatively tight financially, or tight financial circumstances. The commenter continues, we were comfortable, but instead of spending money on therapy, she would spend money on things like ordering out, etc. So part of it could be financial. She went to therapy for a bit when she had a job that covered it. And that's how she found out she had BPD. And the person said it helped. I imagine it helped, but probably not in any large kind of life-changing way, unfortunately. So let me just first point out in this comment that the person saying, though things were tight for them financially, right, which is understandable. I mean, happening more and more in this upside-down world we live in for, like a loaf of bread is going to be $6 soon. Things are really out of control. So a lot of people are living in tight financial situations. But here's the thing about this person with BPD that is the ex of the person who left a comment. So even though they were living with financial, limitations, they were comfortable. And instead of spending the money on therapy, this person's BPDX would spend it on things like ordering out and who knows what else. Well, a lot of people with BPD have that impulsivity, right? And they're doing it for emotional reasons. It's like escapism of pain as well. And so the fact that she would spend, this person's ex with BPD would spend on other things, but not therapy, there's a lot to that, right? It's self-sabotaging. It was that person not taking responsibility. Who knows what she could have learned in the sessions that she could have afforded if she hadn't spent money on other things in rather impulsive and one might say kind of wasteful ways, especially with other needs that could have been prioritized in a healthier way. And so this person is saying, so part of it could be financial. And then she did go to therapy when she had a job that covered it, and that's how she found out she had BPD. It helped. Commenter continues, I don't know if she thought that simply the medication would do it in terms of helping her recover, manage her feelings, but she didn't go back since, and I don't think her new job offered that kind of benefit. So even within a situation where this person describes they were had financial limitations, but comfortable. This person, then when they had some benefits, went to therapy, okay, found out they had BPD, and then, but was making poor choices prior, right? Because, yes, affordability of the kind of therapy that people with BPD really need, because it's long-term. It's it's often an obstacle. But it sounds like for this person, it was a matter of impulsive, self-sabotaging choices and not necessarily just financial circumstances. And then when the commenter says, the ex of the person with BPD says, I don't know if she thought that simply the medication would do it in terms of helping her recover or manage her feelings. No, there is no medication with any efficacy for remitting or, any kind of, quote, cure-all medication, unquote, for BPD dysregulation, triggered emotional dysregulation, the arrested emotional development, unstable sense of self, all the things that people with BPD are really struggling with, which most of that is a, response to trauma in childhood, perceived or actual. And the perceived by some, it's as real as if it were actual. That's why we have a certain percentage of people being diagnosed with borderline personality where it isn't always the family or mom's fault. That's about 20% or less of people with BPD. Then the 80% and maybe like plus, depending what stat you look at, people with BPD that really do have a traumatic childhood, which is unfortunate, which is painful, but which they do have a responsibility to get into healing and to treatment to heal and recover, because otherwise they hurt everybody around them, and some, with more knowledge of that than others, and some very unconsciously. But either way, it's not acceptable, it's not appropriate, and it's not inexcusable how they behave, how they abuse people. Medication is actually counterindicated in the treatment of borderline personality disorder. And that is, it depends on other circumstances or other co-occurring disorders or how many get slapped at a person, shoved at a person. That may well be just the trauma and the BPD. Because they don't need a separate diagnosis for everything, but there's a lot of that going around. It's not helpful either. But medication, pardon me, medication is never going to be the answer, and it doesn't help them regulate emotions really or manage their feelings, and it doesn't do anything in terms of what actual recovery from BPD really is and means, and how that changes people's lives. And by the way, if you have an ex with BPD or a parent or whatever the case, if they're not in therapy, if they're not sticking with therapy, if they don't do several years of therapy, then you're not looking at a situation where the relationship, no matter what the type, is going to be healthy. So the commenter continued that, unfortunately, we broke up after 9 years, close to a month ago. And they're 23 years old, both of them. And I did the math. Not that it's, but I'm not good at math. They met when they were 14. So it sounds like for the person commenting here, more than likely not, a lot of codependency. And then the other person had BPD. And if they were together for 9 years from such a young age, it could be quite a bit of enmeshment with that as well. So they've been together for 9 years, so it was really from 14 to the age of 23. She brought it up, but the feelings were mutual. I regret not offering her free therapy sessions from my work, but we both knew it was better for both of us. Not easy for sure, but taking care of myself and dedicated to going through the process. I guess they mean their own process now of healing and recovery, which potentially it sounds like would involve codependency recovery as well, the family of origin work, and what I'm usually mentioning and talking about. And as always, I'm out here to help anybody that resonates with me, but people do need to get into a healing recovery journey for these issues after. If you have a BPD parent, if you're the adult child of a borderline or narcissist for that matter, or if you've been in a relationship with someone with BPD, there are people out there who say, I got it all covered now, I'm fine, and maybe some of them are, but probably a lot of them don't realize the depth of what they don't yet know about what is really affecting their relationships in adulthood from childhood trauma or adverse experience or unmet needs. Because codependency is a wide swath, right? It's not like everybody with codependency is the same any more than everybody with BPD or everybody with NPD. So affordability as a reason why people with BPD don't get to stay in therapy or don't go to therapy. It can be an obstacle for sure. And of course, what people need to do, some people with BPD are very high functioning, and the only differentiation there is it doesn't mean that they're any more skilled or able to do better in relationships, in relating to others. But it does mean that they often can, get into university, can develop careers, and can manage that. They have strong enough defenses. It's often people with quiet BPD, not always, but that they have strong enough defenses to be higher functioning so that they're actually earning an income. And many people in that situation, again, depending on their income versus cost of therapy, definitely do make the choice to get into therapy. And it's really important for people to pick a modality and a situation and a really good fit for themselves, right? And especially when they're having to pay for their sessions, because I don't think, or whatever the treatment is, I don't think there are too many options anymore. I don't know about every country in the world, but I know in Canada there aren't, and I don't think there are in the U.S. I'm not sure about the U.K. or Australia, but more and more, mental health is being defunded. And with everything else going on in this world and what that really is about, what that means, prices of everything going up. It's like, we're all living in a situation worldwide that is crisis-oriented and very stressful in and of its own right. So, but I think it's really important that people with BPD need to know that they need treatment. Perhaps there are still some places that work with people with BPD on sliding scale fees, or maybe some places where they can get therapy without having to pay for it, or maybe some insurance coverage. But I do happen to know that in the United States, it's probably not much better in Canada either, but in the United States, there are a lot of insurance companies, whether they be through somebody's work or something somebody has purchased insurance for mental health issues and or whatever else. Often, if clinicians in the United States write down borderline personality disorder as a diagnosis, they will not be able to get any money from the insurance to treat these people. So often we see people with BPD being diagnosed with chronic depression, with other things, especially in the U.S., to be able to facilitate, insurance paying for their sessions. And then how that actually works and what do therapists say to the client and what are they actually working on, I wouldn't know. So affordability is a big issue, but there are a lot of people that could be working on this, if even in small steps, with BPD. And so I think that this is a big problem for people for sure, in general, wanting any kind of therapy, help, coaching, etc. But a lot of people with BPD are just not going to go there. Like, even if they were offered free therapy by the best known clinician in the world, whoever that would be, Dr. John Gunderson, Dr. Frank Yeomans, Marsha Linehan, whomever, right? The thing is, they won't go. And there are a lot of emotional reasons, lack of trust, all the issues that really are the core content issues for people with borderline personality will be the blocks and the reasons why they will never choose to go get treatment. Now, that's a high percentage of people with BPD. That's not everybody with BPD. Lots of people are try as they might, to use workbooks like a DBT workbook or a cognitive behavioral therapy kind of workbook, and they're trying really hard to do this on their own, but the reality of that is people really can't heal and recover from BPD in a, quote, self-help, unquote, model. So I think that, that was one of the things that came up, why don't people with BPD seek treatment? And what makes it so difficult for people with BPD to remain in therapy, well, I think when I talked about that, I probably didn't talk about the financial aspect. And this person left a comment of their experience, which is, very valid and I think worth talking about. So talking a bit about that here. But I think what people need to understand is that if somebody with BPD or suspected BPD does not go to treatment, does not get help, whatever the roadblocks, whatever the financial constraints, the relationships are going to be impossible to stay with, maintain, be in, and have them be anything but toxic, painful, cyclical, repeating, splitting, devaluation. And after the initial idealization, by the way, most people with BPD do not go back to re-idealizing anybody. They might go back to a base mood place. They might go back to seeming a little bit more positive towards you. But that's not really going back to re-idealization. So while there are real problems with people accessing treatment for BPD, because in America right now, I think, I'm in Canada for those who don't know, but in the US, I think right now it's over 50% mental health clinicians won't take patients with borderline personality disorder. There are treatment facilities, mainly in America. They cost an arm and a leg. So there would be some people families that could afford, $50,000 a month or whatever it is, because it can be that or more. And there are more that can't afford that as well. So, and I know in Canada, probably the same is going on in the UK or similar things in Australia with our healthcare systems and just everything being underfunded and everything being apparently overused and everything in crisis. But the bottom line, what people really need to know, and sometimes it's just an utter tragedy. If somebody with BPD does want help and they can't afford it, or they can't find a person that's a good fit for them, or the right modality for them, because, there's several modalities, but it's not like DBT isn't for everybody with BPD, for example. It's a great modality. I happen to think it's not a recovery modality, but it's fantastic if people make all kinds of progress with BPD, but it doesn't work for everybody with BPD, like any other modality. So what do you have to know? Right, that you might already know, but you might deny sometimes. If you're in a significant other relationship with somebody with BPD or suspected BPD, or if you have a parent you suspect has BPD or has BPD, or a friend or a sibling, you have to know how to take care of yourself. And you have to know what kind of detachment that often requires from people who often have codependency. And codependency is not the same for everybody. And I just wanted to add in here, and I'll be saying more on this, right? But I've heard so much stuff, and maybe I'll just say, I'll touch on it briefly here, but I'll be talking about it in another podcast episode, specifically and with that singular focus on a lot of things that are being said about codependency out there that are not only an old definition, a non-workable definition of what it is today, what it entails, who really has it, because, I think it was Melody Beattie that said, and I'm not sure based on what, but that 95% of the population was codependent to one degree or another. We're living in times right now where what is happening on the macrocosm scale in many ways, I will say evasively here, is cluster B abuse of the masses, which is producing in many, many people who may not even realize a codependent response. It's a fawn, freeze, often response, or fight, flight. One of the 4 Fs. The other thing that people need to be aware of is that I've just seen some information recently, not only the old school blah-de-blah about what codependency used to be thought of, which, many mental health professionals now know is not appropriate, not applicable, but certainly far from all. And people have their own ideas based on who they listen to, whether podcasts or videos. But codependency is, in its own right, unmet needs in childhood, woundedness in childhood. It is where the roots of codependency are, what they really are. And codependency is a trauma response in its own right, or adverse child experience response. So it's not this idea that it used to be. And then there's a couple other things I've seen recently I could not even believe that people have said. I'm sure there's tons of that out there that would leave me with this feeling of just being gobsmacked. Like, what did they just say? But, everybody has their own ideas, and everybody's going to put it forward the way that I guess they feel like they think they're right. And I just don't agree with, a lot of what I hear. But there's lots of people out there that see codependency pretty much the way that I do, and that it is a trauma response in its own right. So, and I'm going to be talking a lot more about that, and probably on the Codependency Inside Out podcast, because sometimes I'm not sure when I'm talking about different things, what's for the Codependency Inside Out podcast only, and what fits here. And I don't know, maybe the overlap is so great it should just be all folded in to this one podcast. I don't really know. But again, I would like to just end by saying that people, so what is codependency? Don't dismiss it outright and think, well, it couldn't possibly apply to you, because it may well. And it's not a blaming statement. It's not a bad word. And then there is finding out what it actually means versus what a lot of people say it means, or the old idea about what it means, which isn't at all what it's really all about. And I'm a strong advocate that the 12 steps of Codependence Anonymous, because they're the co-opted steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, that unless you have alcoholism or a significant drinking problem, or you have some other type of addiction, drugs or what have you, then Codependence Anonymous is not going to be very helpful. There's the odd thing from there that can help, but I don't think it's really a healthy modality for people to address their codependency when that modality is outdated and the way that codependency used to be defined. So I went into that a little bit just to say that when you have codependency, if that resonates with you right now or not, you're with somebody with BPD and they have all these blocks and reasons why they can't get treatment or won't go to treatment, whether they can't afford it, whether they can't find it, whether they're looking for it, whether they care about it at all or not. The bottom line for so many people, when you're in these relationships that are really, really hurting you, triggering you back to things that were in your unconscious from your childhood that you may or may not realize yet. This is why people have to learn to detach, have to learn to make their own decisions, to leave the person with BPD, to really, if it's a parent, if it's a sibling, it might mean no contact, or it might mean very, very low contact. People have to learn that you are worthy, and especially with codependency, people don't know that they're worthy of taking care of themselves, of learning how to have boundaries, of not always all the things that people learn in childhood. You feel guilty if you focus on yourself. You feel guilty if you want to think about your own feelings. All of this and more happens around not only people with addiction issues or alcoholism, but happens around people with cluster B who are untreated in any relationship type. And many people with codependency will have had a mother or a father or both parents that were cluster B. And you may not know that, or you may suspect that, but you may not have ever put those dots together. So I have a lot of clients who haven't put those dots together, but the dots come together the more we examine the family of origin. So, and I myself, in case anyone doesn't know, had two narcissistic parents with comorbidities. My mother kind of BPD, NPD, but more strongly covert narcissist. And my father, malignant narcissist psychopath. So, and they were both alcoholics. So it was, it was what it was, and it took a lot of healing. But the bad news is we never get our needs met in a childhood, in a dysfunctional family, narcissistic dysfunctional family, cluster B dysfunctional family, or otherwise dysfunctional families. And that creates codependency, and it really is a trauma response. So think about it that way, please, if you haven't already, for yourself. And please realize that whatever the roadblocks might be to a person with BPD getting into therapy and really doing, sticking with therapy and going through that process, which at best, really, Dr. John Gunderson is quoted as saying, takes 8 to 16 years for recovery from borderline personality. And while I only had 4 traits, it seems like I wasn't assessed, and I had what Dr. Fox calls, quote, pure BPD, unquote, that is to say, no co-occurring other disorders, then, I went to therapy from the age of 15 to 30. So that was 15 years, and there was a little bit off and on in the middle of that. But, it definitely took me 8 to 10 years, 12 years in there somewhere, because I'm not saying every minute of 15 years I was in therapy, but more of it than not. And, of course, I've healed and recovered from BPD because that's what people need to do. It's not, quote, psychiatry is going to provide a cure, unquote, anytime soon. They're too busy pathologizing it. So what you need to know, which people really don't want to hear, is that if you're with somebody with BPD untreated for whatever the reasons, then even if they start treatment tomorrow, it's not going to save your relationship. There's so much damage, there's so much woundedness. You have your own healing and recovery work to do. You need to understand more about how you got into this relationship and why have you been there perhaps way too long and getting really hurt. So whatever the reasons, and there's some really compelling ones why some people who want treatment when they have BPD don't find it, can't get it. A lot of different issues with that. But you have to know that if they aren't treated and they don't go get substantial treatment, if you've been in a relationship for 8 years or 9 years or 3 years or 2.5, for any period of time, even 6-8 months, and they're just going to start therapy, it's not going to save your relationship. And them starting therapy without you doing your own work, that can't work either. So what's one of the most difficult aspects of codependency for most people? Learning how to let go, learning how to say no, having boundaries that really are understood and active in your life. So that's why I dipped into codependency here along with this response to a comment on my YouTube channel. And that's a live stream BPDX Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Q&A, which I probably will put in audio format and put in this podcast. Not everybody wants to go searching around a YouTube channel. Not everybody has time to, well, you don't have to. I have a lot of audio there. But, so anyway, treatment for borderline personality can be very difficult for people to find and or afford or stick with, and many people with BPD aren't the least bit interested. They're way too defended. And for people with codependency and people who love anybody with BPD or have loved in any relationship type, the relationship is not going to be healthy. You need your own healing recovery process. You need to take care of yourself. So hope that is a helpful reminder, or perhaps this gives people food for thought wherever you might be if you find this podcast episode. Take care.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakups podcast with counselor and trauma recovery coach AJ Mahari, keeping it real to help you heal. Abuse is not love. You can find this podcast website with blogs and more information and purchase some book sessions with AJ Mahari at ajmahari.ca to help you with your healing and recovery journey from any relationship type with somebody with borderline personality. Please also check AJ's other website, bpdbreakups.com, for blog posts and more information. AJ's membership site can be found at ajmahari.co. Please keep tuning in, and if you're not subscribed to AJ Mahari's YouTube channel, please check it out at youtube.com/AJ Mahari.